Okay, this is a trigger warning. This panel is probably going to get very dark. So if you don't want to hear some rather frank discussions, you might want to leave. So with that, Amanda, will you introduce yourself?
My name is Amanda Fuesting. I am a registered nurse and a certified hospice and palliative care nurse. I have been a hospice nurse for about 5 years. It is what I went to nursing school to do. I have been bedside for over 100 deaths. I'm extremely passionate about terminal illness and it being handled well and represented well. As a side note, I have brought notebooks and pens and candy, and you guys are welcome to come up and get them at any time.
I'm Brian de Almeida. I ended up getting roped into this because of my sister here. Ended up in fandom altogether through my stepmother, Sarah Hoyt, who somehow wasn't here this year. On the subject, while I have experience with death in both medical and violent forms and some of the handling of dead bodies, my primary thing here is chronic illness. I'm now 15 years post-liver transplant and have been living with an ileostomy for the last 6 months since having my entire colon removed after 3 years of ulcerative colitis. I've had more near-death experiences than, well, and just about anybody else I know. So that's really what I'm here for.
Jim Curtis, I'm a retired naval flight officer, 23 years working for the government as a defense contractor. I've got a couple series out. My latest one's up here if anybody's interested. They've got it down in the vendor area, and I'll be talking about the military perspective on this.
So I'm Nikhil Rao, my brother and sister over there, and I agree it would have been nice to have Aunt Sarah out here. Don't ask why she's his stepmom and my aunt, it gets really confusing.
Yes.
But I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I specifically work in the main hospital. I am the palliative care guy, I'm the grief counselor for the nurses, for the other doctors, and sometimes for the kids themselves as they approach terminal or otherwise life-limiting disease. Like Brian, I have a chronic illness. We used to compete over who was going to die sooner, but we both seem to have gotten stable enough that that's kind of just, too far off in the future.
Thanks to good women.
Yeah, there's mine.
Mine's over here.
Yeah. But yeah, that's my perspective. And
I'm Scott Bascom. I feel underqualified. Most of my experience in this is having chronic health problems, most of which are to a few specific things. I've dealt with death. I took care of my dad 24/7 for 1.5 years while he had bone cancer and dementia and heart failure, all three. And that led to some of my chronic health problems. And I apologize if I get a little emotional. As of a few hours ago, I've got 2 close relatives who are basically, we're waiting for them to die. So,
We came up with 5 questions, and we were taking this from the perspective of how do you have your character deal with this? So the first question, professionals working in the field that encounter death frequently tend to compartmentalize everything. How does this impact their reactions to death and grieving? So this is something you can look at for your characters. And we'll start with Scott.
so the question, as I understand it, is how do you deal with this as a professional?
Yeah.
So full disclosure, I do small business consulting and I'm a blogger. So hopefully I'm not dealing a lot with death. But on a professional level, on a day-to-day level, how do I deal with the fact that someone close to me has died? It's one step at a time. There are days so dark that you can't tell more than 5 feet ahead of you, emotionally speaking. And sometimes you can't tell more than about a half step ahead of you. And you set out the day as much as you can, and you pre-plan it, and you walk, and you will fall down, you will bump into things, and you will get hurt. But you do not have a better option than going forward.
So this is something I unfortunately deal with pretty regularly. Deaths of children are always dramatic, especially when it's your job to save them. I have a particularly weird job during the code, the final code, and as the psychiatrist and most useless doctor on the team, I stand outside the room and let people hug me, patients' parents, other staff members, whoever, as this is going on, and that's all I can do is just stand there and hug back. You have to compartmentalize because you've still got a floor full of people who need you. You've still got people at home who need you. On the other hand, compartmentalizing can become damaging because it's very easy to turn that into repression or even to make it so taboo in your outside life that you are unwilling to share it with the people that need to know. That's something that Alex has had to deal with quite a bit as I get used to actually having someone in my life and sort of almost like the Snickers commercial, why are you getting angry? It's like, well, this happened. And it's like, well, how was I supposed to know? So one of the things about professionals who compartmentalize is none of us do it all that well, and none of us realize that we're bad at it. We're pretty Dunning-Kruger about it.
I am the on-call overnight nurse, and I have also done case management, so I've had everything from, I've been taking care of this patient for 9 months from the time they were admitted to hospice until the day they died, and I've just seen this patient for the first time, and they are actively dying when I walk in the room. I've also had it to where the family calls and I get there and the patient's already dead. So sometimes you do not have time or the space to deal with your own emotions in that kind of situation. You just can't. You have to put whatever you're dealing with aside, whether it's something going on in your own personal life, your own feelings about the death, your feelings about the patient. And when it's a patient that you've gotten to know or somebody you have gotten close to, it's very difficult. But you ignore it, you put it aside, and then later on, you deal with it. I have found that it's very healthy to find some way to let go of that person. I tend to light candles or pray for them or write a letter to them. But there in that moment, you can't. You don't exist. You are your job.
On this issue of compartmentalization, when you're dealing with it a lot, one of my observations has been, okay, we're dealing with this as part of work, and so you kind of wall that off from your personal life. And my observation has been is a lot of people who are able to deal with this well in a work environment are some of the worst in dealing with grieving personally, when it isn't a patient, when it isn't somebody you've worked with and done dangerous jobs with. That separation of work and personal life works until it hits you in your personal life, and often then we end up being the ones needing the most help dealing with that. And secondary compartmentalization, one of the other major coping mechanisms that we all develop is a dark sense of humor. I say what doesn't kill you gives you a lot of really unhealthy coping mechanisms and a dark sense of humor.
Really bad jokes.
Yeah, I mean there are things that we will laugh about that normal people go, you said what and laughed.
Yeah.
That's another one of the ways that we learn to cope with these things.
Okay, the second question is what impact does military service have on reactions to death and injury, and how would that differ from civilians who encounter death frequently? I'm the only old fart military guy here. I've lost over 30 friends, military in accidents and in combat. Compartmentalization goes a step further in the military. There was a study done at NAMI, Naval Aerospace Medical, back in the 80s, and the outbrief was called Sex and the Naval Aviator, and it dealt with compartmentalization. How many people have ever seen the movie The Right Stuff or read the book? Very few. There's a sequence in there called 10 Little Indians. It's about the graveside service for an aviator that dies in a crash. The military response is, too bad it was him, it won't be me. If you let what happens get to you, you become non-functional in the military environment. Whether it's aircraft, whether it's ground combat, anything else, you become non-functional. You cannot afford to let your battle buddies, your shipmates, anybody else down. So you cram it in the back of your mind and lock it away. Some people actually do deal with it later, others never do, until they crack at some point later in their life. The common term you hear today is PTSD. It's real. It's ugly. Now, how can you write this with your character? That's where it becomes an issue of how strong is your character mentally? What outside influences can impact the way you write that character? And since we have limited time, I'm going to go to the next question. Writers often approach the character who knows that they have a limited lifespan with either fatalism or overcaution. Those are reactions that people have, but they're hardly the only ones. And people don't usually stay in either one of those if they actually get a chance to grieve the perceived loss or to accept the new reality of their condition. What does this actually look like from a personal response? And I'll go to Nick first.
So I'm gonna leave my own personal history aside here and just talk about what it's like for my patients. There's a really weird thing about pediatric illness and pediatric fatal illness, and that we can see it coming from years away. We know it's happening. So I remember grabbing Chick-fil-A to celebrate the 16th birthday of a patient of mine that had just received a lung transplant. Literally less than a week before. And this was an interesting thing because we were celebrating 16, which is this mark of maturity. Transplants sound like a great thing, but when it comes to lungs, 50% of them will make it to 5 years, 20% of them will make it to 10. So we're sitting there celebrating her 16th birthday, and me and her mom and dad were all thinking, she may not be around for 21. And so the responses are interesting in these kids because we generally find out that they have a fatal life-limiting illness before the kid is capable of processing. So what you watch are these sort of twin pressures of the severity of their disease as well as their maturity level. And you go through the grieving stages, you really do. And then you decide what you're going to do with it. Everybody has a different choice, and everybody will argue that that choice is valid. I've had kids who just shut themselves down, who restricted themselves to the bed, who did nothing, and actually came to me because they could have had more quality of life. They could have pushed themselves further. They just didn't see the point if they were going to die at 20 or 21. And then I've had kids come to me and go, well, how can I be more brave? How can I be more aggressive? How can you get me more energetic so I can get the most out of this? But there needs to be sort of a courageous, almost humorous fatalism that you see in these kids that are successful in managing this. Sort of, so what, no one gets out of this alive, that you really see. Or this bravery about, well, I'm going to die anyway, might as well take chances.
Well, I'm going to do the opposite of Nick and hit my personal history. October 2004, I suddenly went into liver failure and received a liver transplant 3 weeks later after a week in a coma. I come out of the coma not knowing what the hell country I was in, because the last thing I can remember is being in an ICU in Manila, Turns out I had been flown by my mother back to the States, was in LDS hospital, sat on the transplant list for 5 days at the very top of the list, and hey, you've had a liver transplant. And I went from 21, reasonable life expectancy, into 80 or so, to reasonable life expectancy in the 10 to 20 year range tops, which I'm 3/4 of the way through, at 15 years right now. And so, what do? There's certainly an amount of fatalism to that. Sometimes it's, you know what? I'm not going to worry about my 401k contributions because I will not be old enough to ever take it. So I'll pocket the money now and actually find things that I want to do with my life. My approach to it has kind of become an adopted motto. It's Fido, fuck it, drive on. There are things that are completely out of my control. I've now had 3 minor incidences of cancer in the last 5 years. All of them caught early enough that they were able to that all required was surgical intervention. With my ulcerative colitis, I spent 2.5 years on high-dose steroids and low-grade chemotherapy and various immune modulators. And all of that stuff makes you sick. Not to mention my digestive system wasn't functioning. I was bleeding constantly while I was working 60 hours a week, finishing a degree, raising 2 kids, and then looking for a job and looking to relocate across the country. But the whole Fido thing is, there are things that are within my control, and I'm going to take those by the horns, and I will make decisions, and I will live my life. And there's a whole bunch of this stuff that is essentially out of my control, and that you just take it as it goes day to day and move on. That's where fuck it comes in. I have no control over this. I'm just going to roll with it, and I'm going to do the best with everything that I can control.
This is what's called stubborn.
I see this a lot in patients. You would think that every patient coming onto hospice would know that they are dying. You'd be surprised at just how many have not accepted that they're dying. And I have seen everything from the 21-year-old dying with their 3rd time having cancer and has now recognized that it has metastasized to the brain, and this is it. So what do they do with that? They can be really upset about it, and they are for a while, and then they realize, I had 6 months, tops. I can do whatever the hell I want with that. And they do. We have taken patients to the casino so they could gamble away their paycheck with 0 guilt whatsoever, knowing that they weren't going to be around to spend the next one anyway. We've taken patients to parties. We have arranged for patients to have adjunct hospice services in another state so they could take that longed-for vacation to Disneyland with their family, mortgaged to the hilt on it, knowing that they were never going to be around to pay that bill anyway. And they're fine with that. You see sometimes it goes the other way though. People never really do accept it. They fight till the end. I had a patient who, the first of 3 times she had cancer, her response was to leave the rehab center that her brother put her in, have a friend wire her money, take a bus across the country to Florida, California, where she sat on a beach for 3 weeks drinking margaritas until her brother finally tracked her down and convinced her to go back and have chemo. The second time she had cancer, she did much the same thing. Instead of going to California, she went to Colorado. The 3rd time, it had metastasized to the brain. And she knew she only had so much time. But she left the hospice facility that her brother put her in to die and said, fuck it, I'm gonna do exactly what I want to do, went back to her own house with her cats, and refused to leave until such a time that she could no longer transfer herself from her bed to her wheelchair.
This woman's kind of my hero.
Yeah. When her time finally came, she was actively dying for 3 weeks. By this, I mean she could not eat, she could not drink, she could not swallow. The sole moisture coming into this woman's body was from the ambient air, her pain medication, and moistened oral swabs to keep her mouth moist for 3 weeks. There was just no quit in her. And that's how it is for some people. And people die exactly when they are ready and not 1 minute before, regardless of what anybody tells you. Some people never give up, but most people do. Most people kind of finally reach a place where they're no longer entirely fatalistic about it. They have just simply accepted that this is a thing, and the time that I have between now and when that happens is undetermined, but it is my time.
I kind of need to counterpoint. So my problems probably won't kill me. I have what I refer to as my party trick, where I touch the back of my head to my shoulder, and it looks like I'm twisting my head off, and most people ask me to stop.
It is disturbing.
Yes, yes.
The rest of us.
Anyways, and I can put my foot behind my head. For those of you who can't see very well, I have a svelte 300-pound form. It's called hypermobility. Every single one of my joints is looser than it should be by a serious margin. When I finally figured out what was happening, I got really, really angry. Nick has probably seen this kind of reaction in pediatric patients. But I didn't so much get suicidal as, because there's a difference between wanting to commit suicide and not caring if you die. And not caring what happens to you because you know that you will end up crippled and in pain and unable to move. And there's a very good chance that I will not be able to move under my own power in another 30 or 40 years. I'm doing my best with my joints, but I have 2 herniated discs. I'm 30. I have arthritis in most of my joints. I regularly dislocate my wrists, my hips. And there is a reaction that can happen where instead of saying I'm going to go to the beach and drink margaritas, I'm going to go do the most stupid, insane things I can. And I've had some great life experiences from that, to be completely fair.
Water moccasins.
Oh, yeah, hey, that was a fun one.
Wait, you've done that too?
Oh, yeah. I've done Idaho.
Yeah, we've also done it.
There's a reason I have all of my brothers on this panel.
Or, going into the middle of Baltimore as, white-looking boy with, hi, you look interesting, you're homeless, I want to interview you. Don't do that. That does not add to your lifespan. But they're...
Stay out of Southeast Asia when you're in that mood.
Yeah.
And North St. Louis in general. So.
But be aware, and I'm going to step outside my head box for a moment and say, as a writer, sometimes they're just angry. Obligatory Harry Potter reference. Everyone here, I'm assuming, has read Harry Potter or is at least familiar with it. The first time I read about Dementors, I thought, I don't know if that would really do anything to me. And that says some really horrifying things about my mental and emotional state. But be aware, that is a reaction.
So he brings up an excellent point. Rebellion is a really common response to finding out this kind of news. Brian tried to be a nurse despite being immunosuppressed. That was brilliant.
Yeah, that got me, 2 years of MRSA pneumonia, almost killed me, and kind of derailed 2 years of schooling. This is why I'm not a nurse anymore.
I thought that as a man with a high spinal cord injury, what I should do is rock climb and get in fights with guys that are even bigger than my 230 pounds, which I did regularly with my face. And then I competed in strength sports because that's what you should do with a broken back, right? Rebellion is a big thing. Kids stop taking their meds, adults stop taking their meds. They refuse to go to their doctor's appointments. They like Amanda's patient, don't go to chemo because you're angry. And it's not denial. You're angry and you're pissed, and who cares? Gonna die anyway. And ironically, though, the fact that I rebelled and started competing in weightlifting is probably the only reason I'm still walking. So you never know. Sometimes rebellion works.
I'm going to diverge just a hair here because they pretty much covered what I could say, and I'm not as broke as they are yet, even though I'm the old fart.
Hey, I'm completely.
Medically, I'm older than you.
Ah, shit.
I got body work.
Hey, I earned mine, okay? But I want to talk about rehabilitation. And this is something that is a sore point with me that a lot of writers do not do correctly. You can put somebody in your novel in a med box, have them, magically 3 days later regrow a limb, whatever. What people do not realize is, even if you do that, that limb is not going to work until it has been taught how to move. How many people are familiar with prosthetics or seen videos of people with prosthetics? Have you ever noticed how they look like they're about to bust their ass the first time they try it? And then 3 months or 6 months later, now you don't even hardly know they have a prosthetic. So as a writer, remember that. Think about how that impacts your character. How many people have seen Starship Troopers or read Heinlein? Jeez, not a lot. Yeah, I guess it's us old farts that remember that stuff. But in the movie, what happens with the kid that gets shot and ends up in the tank? He pops out and goes right back into combat the next day. Ain't gonna happen. Next question. What happens with burnout? Burnout's a real problem for police, military, and medical professionals. How much of that is related to being unable to grieve the deaths that have happened in a professional setting? And what does that look like in a character? And I'll kind of start this one off because I have to deal with this one. It's two things. It's anger and it's distancing from people. Because I've seen it up close and personal. And I tend to not make friends because I don't want to see them die. In my mind, I know that's wrong. But my way of dealing with it is to not make friends. I'll make acquaintances, but I don't let people in because it hurts too much when they die. Amanda?
I would say burnout is a huge problem in the medical field for exactly that reason. I expect all of my patients to die, okay? I'm fine with death. I have a very weird perspective on death. I adopted 3 people with chronic illnesses as my brothers. I love them, and when their time comes, I'll be there.
What am I, dog food?
You're my uncle, not a brother.
You're Uncle Jim.
You're Uncle Jim.
Thank you.
Right. So it's like, but when their time comes, I'll be there, and I'll be fine with it. But for most people going into medicine, whether it's CNAs, nurses, doctors, you go in to save lives. And whether you're in the emergency room, the psych ward, or the OR, doesn't matter what field of medicine you're in, you're going to lose some. And some of them you're going to lose extremely traumatically. And the more you do this, and the more patience you lose, and the more time goes by, the harder it is for you to deal with it, both on a personal level and on a professional level. There's a story from my nursing school I'm going to tell. One of my fellow student nurses in our last semester of nursing school was in the ICU with her preceptor, and a patient came in after an extremely traumatic car wreck. The patient was barely in one piece after leaving the OR. This patient was going to die. The only question was whether their family would have time to get there or not. And her preceptor sent her into the room to assess this patient with one family member in the room crying over their comatose loved one on a ventilator with 5 or 6 ICU or IV drips running through them. And my friend completely lost it and started running, quite literally running. She ran out of the hospital to her car, drove home, and left nursing school. Technically, she clinically failed. Realistically, she dropped out. That's burnout before she's even hit the floor. We lose a lot that way. We typically lose people within 3 to 5 years. People move jobs, people leave the bedside. People decide, I'm gonna go get an advanced degree and go into management because I can't lose anymore. And that's what you deal with burnout.
On the chronic illness perspective, burnout's also very applicable. When you're dealing with something every day that saps your energy, that every day has you waking up in pain levels that send most normal people running to the emergency room, knowing that every day that is only going to get worse as the day goes on. Knowing that basically every day you are going to be more tired, you are going to feel more sick than you did the week before. And you have done this treatment and this treatment and this treatment, and none of them have done anything. You can get burned out just trying to go through the motions of living your life. Just the amount of effort required to wake up, take your meds, follow up with your doctors, actually talk to people who care about you, can be overwhelming in and of itself. And so there are certainly, especially the last couple of years, there were times I tried very hard to pull into a shell, and then I have my evil twin sister pestering me on the phone. Are you okay? Have you eaten in the last 2 days? Have you taken your meds? And some days, you know, part of the thing with digestive diseases, eating hurts. Every meal was agony. I got to the point where I was avoiding eating 2 and 3 days in a row because being hungry, having low blood sugar was better than dealing with eating food. And so to this day, I get checkups, I get check-ins from Amanda because now my reaction to stress is to not eat. I get she checks on me basically once or twice every day. Have you eaten today? Was it actually a meal? It was a granola bar. Go eat a meal, Brian. And just the effort of self-care, the effort of just minimal self-care even can lead to the same degree of burnout, and it can have the same degree of consequences to you personally as it can from dealing with these things in a professional setting.
Probably the worst job in the military is what they call a CACO. That's the casualty officer that has to go notify the parents or the loved ones. That is one of the hardest things in the world to do. The second hardest is to carry an empty casket, because the body's not coming back. You never get closure.
So I didn't do this for pay, but I did spend 18 months as a 24/7 caretaker of a man with dementia. There's a specific incident that I'm going to relate. And remember, with context, I'm dealing with my own chronic illness while this happens. I'm not in as much pain as Brian is typically, but that doesn't mean I'm pain-free. I remember one evening where I had just about lost everything, mentally and emotionally. And my dad is sitting there on the couch. And I have to watch him because otherwise he wanders off. He's just having one of those days. And he'll do things like set the toaster on fire without meaning to. I went through 3 or 4 toasters before I just stopped having them. I didn't have any glass in the house other than the windows because he'd accidentally break things. Friends would come over and ask why I didn't have mirrors. It's not that I hate mirrors, it's that man with dementia breaks things. And I remember every 2 to 5 minutes, I actually would check on my watch, and it was just like a random timer. He would start the same conversation again. And it had been happening for about 6 hours. And if you think that's frustrating with a 2-year-old, think about it being frustrating with somebody who's tall enough to get in the cabinets and thinks that they should be in charge of you because they spanked you when you were 2. And I just lost it. And I remember just breaking down and just walking out and saying, you know what, if the house burns down, if he dies, doesn't matter what happens, if I get hit by a car, I'm okay with that right now. I'm done. I'm beyond done. And it was several hours before I was back. And I remember thinking about it later, and it's not that I've never been closer to suicide. But I've never been so numb and ready to be gone. And I think that's a different form of burnout.
It is.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. We're not even going to get to the last question, that's all right. This is about a 2-hour panel anyway. So I'd like to open it up to questions. Hang on.
Glenda, is there a panel in this room after we leave?
Yes, the film festival will be coming in,
Okay.
So I'd like to open up the floor to questions. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
How do you handle grief for children?
I'm going to let you have this one, Nick.
Yeah, please.
How do we handle children's grief or the grief of losing a child?
With children's grief, say I was writing a YA or a middle grade novel and the child loses someone.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you to go ahead and Google something. Childhood traumatic grief, Medical University of South Carolina. So they actually have a training module that can be used by anyone. It's a little jargony, but anyone with a brain can get through it. But it explains what childhood traumatic grief is. It explains some of the things we can do. And helping a child through grief is all about sort of what developmental stage they are. So a 0 to 5-year-old isn't going to understand much more than they've gone away for a very long time and you won't ever see them again. They don't understand the permanency of death. So it's about reinforcement in a gentle but open way. As they get older, that's when you start to get the questions about why. They understand and they ask why. And then as they head into their teenage years, that's when it becomes more of the anger, more of the rebellion, more of the where is the justice in this world. And so as the teenagers, you tend to see the really self-destructive acts of grief or the or the teenager, and they may have experienced the actual grief 5 or 10 years before, but that's where you start to see the scars direct them down paths you'd rather not see them go down. So that's where it kind of becomes okay, let's look at your story. Let's look at who you are and who you're going to be, and let's look at how you're taking this thing that happened to you. And you don't ever want to go all the way to the guilting of, grandpa wouldn't have wanted this for you, but you do want to get to the point of, would your grandpa have thought this was an appropriate reaction? Is this what your grandpa would have wanted? Things like that.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What was the full title of Childhood Traumatic Grief?
And the website is Medical University of South Carolina.
Okay, thanks.
Better known as MUSC. Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment, there is no such thing as 5 steps to grief. There are just 5, you don't go through them in the steps, stages.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes, sir.
So you mentioned in a lot of professional fields and inside of the military that there is this compartmentalization that happens. Is that something that is taught, or is it something that is naturally inside of the people who are left after that set of process?
It's, well, 2 things. First of all, the military is going to break you down when you go into boot camp to whatever, however you get the commission, enlisted, however. They're going to break you down and bring you back up. One of the things that you are taught, not openly, but you are taught, is how to compartmentalize. Yes, ma'am.
What is it like raising a child dealing with chronic illness?
Did you hear the question?
I did hear the question.
Okay.
I don't raise kids dealing with it, but I do obviously play a role in how they do.
No, what I mean is like when you have
When you have
chronic
chronic
illness
illness.
and then you have children to look after.
That's a Scott and Brian question.
Oh, I have something to say on that one. Are you talking about parents who have chronic illnesses and they have children? There's a Facebook group called Mamas Facing Forward that deals entirely in that, for parents who have chronic illnesses and they're dealing with that stuff. And sometimes their kids have the chronic illnesses and sometimes they have it and sometimes they both have it. So
Did that answer your question?
it's a good resource.
Facebook group Moms Facing Forward for parents who have chronic illness and are raising children, just for the purposes of the YouTube audience.
The thing is that there are many different ways to handle it, and this is one thing that you learn both in the military and in the professional world. No one right way of dealing with grief. Everybody handles it differently. Some people scream, some people cry, some people turn and walk away. So there's no right way, no wrong way. So you write it based on how your character does, what you think that character does. And the other thing I would say is please do your research, because there's nothing that will throw a reader out of a story faster than something that just jars that they know is wrong. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
In the chronic illness, can it also be a mental instead of just?
Yes, it can very, very well be mental. Let me ask a quick question. What mental illness do all dragons have in every piece of literature you see? And I'm getting a couple of people that know the mental illness that they have is hoarding. What do they hoard? Gold. What's a dead giveaway if you want to kill a dragon? Find the gold and you're going to find the dragon. So yes, that very much plays into it. The other thing that plays into it is the depth of that phobia or that mental illness. It can be a strength or a weakness in your character. My protagonist, and I don't write perfect characters for a reason, but my protagonist is a military guy that hates to lose his troops. Anybody else? No. Sorry.
The short version, physical is mental. If you look at the parts of the brain that light up when you are in physical pain, it's the same parts of the brain that light up when you are depressed. And so, I mean, one of the things that can actually help people who are chronically ill and chronically depressed is just regular consumption of painkillers, which can lead to other problems because you overconsume painkillers because you're trying to numb the pain, and so you get stomach problems and liver issues and things.
Just wanted to bring up real quick, Viktor Frankl. He is a major player in psychiatry and psychotherapy. He actually was a concentration camp survivor. And this dude actually held group therapy sessions while they were in concentration camps because his thought process was, we're gonna die anyway, we might as well not be miserable. So he has an idea, he has a concept here that we cannot change the circumstances of our life, the things that happen to us, but we can certainly change the attitude with which we face them. Exactly. And it turns out that is a physical thing. It turns out that if you look at the brain of someone who has accepted the pain as a part of their life and has accepted a sense of humor about their illness, their brain looks different, their stress hormones look different. And I guarantee you, if Brian and I didn't have that kind of attitude, we'd both be dead by now.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you give them the name of the book?
The book to read is Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. It was a different era, so it didn't say humans, so I apologize.
It's Frankel. And I think we're done because, all right, thank you very much.